everyone. How are you? Have you been doing some good reading? Have you been locked away in a book that you got to a point where you were so sad that it ended and that last page, and you can't just go into the next book. You need time to digest. Totally understand that. But what I would really encourage you to do is, if you are in the process of finishing off a book, the one I'm going to suggest to you in our session now is a book that I would get stacked up and ready for when you're ready to go in again, because it's creepy and it's powerful. And at the moment, authors seem to be coming up with the most tremendous twists, and this book ticks that box perfectly. So anyway, before we get into the book, let me welcome into the consultation for our session Jenny Blackhurst. Jenny, how are you?
Hi, nice to see you.
Do you know, we have a mutual acquaintance, friend, I would imagine, in Kelly Lacey. And it was so lovely because Kelly's mentioned you to me before, and then when your book was sent, and it was like, now I get a chance to meet you. So I know we're screen to screen, but the great thing is we get a chance, if you don't mind, to talk about you as an author, your writing, your books, and in particular, we're going to talk about The Summer Girl, and we might get a little bit further as well, because I love the fact that, this idea of, we're here to talk about this book, but on the shelf behind you, I know is the one that will come after. So again, readers, listeners, if you are reading Jenny for the first time, I mean, there's a beautiful range of books to read, but this one is out. I think it's out now, is it? Yeah. July. Came out in July. Real time, we're here in August. So it's out there. You don't need a pre-order. It is there. And the book on the shelf, Jenny, is that for pre-order? When's that one out?
Well, this is out on the 23rd of August, so I'm not sure when this will come out.
Well, we'll be with the public mid-August, so it won't be that long before they can get hold of that one as
You can
well.
either pre-order or just cool your heels for a minute or two. Read The Summer Girl,
Yeah,
and then by the time you're finished,
yeah.
it'll be out.
You are tremendously prolific, and I don't want you to say tell us your secret, because I know everybody has a process, everybody has their way of writing and what works for them. But best-selling author of 8 thrillers, and then the 3 card murders on the way. You've been published by Headline UK, published by Canelo, and the book that's going to come out is by HQ. So it's like you're an integral part of the publishing world as well. That being brought out by different publishers. And then I read a beautiful, I mean, it struck a chord with me, and I thought, this is fabulous, that you're one of the leading British crime authors in Germany and Poland. And that's like, wow. Have you had feedback? Do you know why? I mean, I know why it's great, but I wonder if, people reading elsewhere perceive your work differently.
I think I was incredibly lucky, and I know that people say that, but it's most of it is luck, because there are so many good books out there, and some do really well and others just don't. And so I think a large percentage of that is marketing and your publishers, and a large percentage is luck and timing. And so in Germany they still have something called the netbook agreement, which
Okay.
means the books still cost a decent amount. You can't really get a book for 99p in Germany, which means that I think people in Germany, they buy fewer books, but they read the ones they buy, because I don't know how many books you've bought that you saw on sale and haven't got round to yet, but I think they read the books that they buy and then they follow the authors, whereas I feel like since then with a massive explosion of Kindle books, especially in the UK, and with all the 99p deals that go on, I think we fill our Kindles and we don't necessarily then sit and wait for the author to bring out their next one. I think we fill our Kindles and then forget by the time the author's brought out another one a year later that we loved that author. Whereas in Germany, I still think they do things our old way.
Yeah, I wonder as well, in doing it that way, is there a sense of valuing and savoring a book? Almost, it's not the production line of one book after another. I mean, if we sat and ate cream cakes in that manner, we wouldn't enjoy it in the end. It would be too much. And I wonder if should we be looking to strike a balance? Because, in a way, whilst I agree the idea of valuing a book for all the effort and all the work that has gone into it, but if a publisher is able to say, well, okay, maybe not everybody can afford, X number of pounds for a book, but they might want to read it, then if every now and again we can do it's available now. So I think, but an author I was talking.
Libraries, don't forget your libraries, because libraries
Yes,
support authors in a massive way.
in a massive way.
As
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And I would never disagree with people using secondhand bookshops. I shop shops and secondhand bookshops all the time, because it means that I might then come across an author from ye olden days who I'd never heard of, who's not on the shelves anymore, not in the supermarkets, isn't being promoted heavily on Kindle. And so that's how I find new authors as well. I just think read any way you can. And I'm not disparaging 99p deals at all. They got, they're a big part of my income is Kindle, and and that sort of race to the bottom and discounting, that all contributes to my income and my readership. So I'm not disparaging any of that, but I do feel like the reason that I've got a continued readership in Germany over the last 8 years that I've been writing, I believe that's because they still tend to follow authors rather than just books, volume.
Yeah. I think it's a very, very interesting phenomena. But I just to echo what you said, because I know, Newcastle Noir, we work, really closely with Newcastle City Library, and that sense of, all the delights that sit within a library, and that, you can just go in and have a book. And the beautiful thing is you can have a book without the burden of thinking, where am I going to put all these books?
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, I've got a lovely office in my garden, which actually, if I'd have thought about it and realized we were recording, I'd have probably taken you in there. But it's
next time,
I promise. It's when I was doing a slightly less professional version of this kind of interview, I was feeling slightly less professional. I ran through to the office to show them, and it's full of books. And I often think to myself, what I should have done was just stuck to the library card, because although I've got tons and tons of books, I feel like the library takes the pressure off. You don't look at them on your shelves every day and think, I don't have time to read this amount of books in my entire lifetime. Whereas I've got such good memories of going into the library. I was Matilda without the magic. When I was younger, I used to just sit in the library and read for hours. My mum would take my brother to the playground next to the library, and I'd sit in the library and read.
Yeah. And again, coming back to that idea of the days we live in, where there seems to be, the desire to do away with those valuable and vital public spaces.
Awful.
Yeah. So
it would be awful if we lost our library. I would feel awful.
Definitely. So shout out to libraries, wherever you are in the world watching this, use your library, enjoy that space, support the events, and support your librarians, because if they haven't got the book, I can guarantee they'll get it for you. So here we are, 9 books if we count 3 Card Murders, 9 books since 2011, if I'm right, because after the birth of your son, you wrote your first novel.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's not too personal, I wonder if you can share with us how those two, I mean, amazing, momentous moments in your life, how they coincided.
They absolutely are inextricably linked. Because I was made redundant when my son was 4 weeks old. And so I used to manage a retail outlet called Jane Norman. Shout out
Mm,
to all our old carrier bag fans. Everyone had a Jane Norman carrier bag
yeah,
back in the day. And I used to manage the store. And when I was on maternity leave 4 weeks in, I got a phone call from the girl who was running the store for me to say that we were shutting down. Bailiffs are on the way. We've had to close the doors. So I left my baby with my mum, sort of ran in, and that was it. It was over. The shop was in darkness. All the staff were sitting on the floor crying, and that was it. We were done. And so I'd already been feeling with the birth of my son, I'd already felt that niggling sort of chipping away of my identity. So I've said this so many times in talks, but like you go to baby groups and you sign in as Connor's mum, or you sign in with the name of your child, Connor, and then the relationship mother. And I didn't even put my name down. And when you go to the doctors, they'll call Connor Blackhurst through to the, to be seen. And you just sort of kind of lose a little bit of yourself when you give that over to motherhood. And then when you meet people for the first time, which you do a lot when you're a
mhm.
new mum, you meet a lot of other new mums, and they say, "Oh, so what do you do?" And I lost that as well in those 4 weeks.
Yes, yeah.
And so it, for me, it was like my whole sense of identity just came crashing down, and I hadn't realized how much I'd based my identity on what I did for a living, and also um yeah, just that sense of me that I had before. I wasn't sure what it was anymore. I wasn't sure who I was. um Add to that, I was flipping exhausted all the time, because a 4-week-old
Yeah,
baby is exhausting. My son didn't sleep. He had tongue tie. I'd had a C-section, which meant I was in pain.
yeah.
So it was just this huge thing for me. Losing my job was probably like as momentous as giving birth at that point 4 weeks later. Um, and I would often I thought social services were coming for me at any point when I had my first baby. I was certain that I wasn't going to be a good enough mum, and there was always going to be a reason for my child to be like taken away from me. And they don't give you any training. You can go to training classes for dogs, but there are not training
But not
classes
for,
for
yeah,
children.
yeah, yeah.
Or if they are, they're not advertised. And at the time in 2011, I certainly wasn't made aware of
Mm-hmm,
how
mm-hmm.
to teach your child classes. So I just felt lost and at sea, and I felt like anything I did was going to be wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
And I couldn't drive, so I would take long walks with my son. And I was about to take one of these long walks, and I pulled this monster truck of a pushchair, huge thing, out onto my front doorstep, down the step. And I lived on a main road with cars going by all the time. And I realized I'd left my purse at the top of the stairs. And I could see the pram at all times. I turned backwards, ran up the stairs, grabbed my purse like this, ran back down. But I was convinced that one of the cars driving past would have seen that baby
Yeah.
abandoned, no mother to look after it. Social services were definitely coming for that one. Worse than the fact that I hadn't hoovered the carpet in a week. So all the way walking to Tesco's, on my usual walk, I was just thinking about how we perceive things versus how the outside world might see them.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously I knew that I could see my baby at all times, but the person driving past, the imaginary person that was
Uh-huh.
definitely reporting me to social services, they couldn't see that. And this idea sort of suddenly started forming in my mind of a woman who was so exhausted from giving birth and all that trauma that she'd been through,
Mm-hmm.
that suddenly little things like that started to add up to her looking to the outside world like she wasn't coping. Things like, slamming her thumb in the car seat, and so she's swearing and people outside think she's swearing at her baby, but she's just trapped her thumb. And that happened to me as well. And I said, at the time I was like, oh my God, people now think I'm swearing at my baby and leaving them on the front doorstep. And it just, to me, all those things added up to inadequate mother. To everyone else, no one else would have noticed that, definitely. But it was how I felt. And so I had this idea of a woman who, what if you're told you've done the worst thing that a mother can do, and everyone around you believes it because of all these things that they've seen that they definitely think add up to you being ill. And that was where the sort of nugget of the idea came from. And suddenly I thought, well, what if I couldn't remember? So what if I had no memory of an event, and I was told I'd done the worst thing because I was exhausted, I was ill, I was suffering from postnatal depression. Would I believe in myself now? With that loss of identity,
Yeah.
would I believe in me? And could I be convinced that I'd done something terrible? And that's where the idea from How I Lost You came from. And it's about a woman who wakes up and she's told that she's smothered her 12-week-old child. And she's taken to a psychiatric institute at the time, it was called. I'm not sure if we still call them those now, but in 2011, that was the word we used. And she's taken to this facility and she spends 4 years there. And when she gets out, she relocates, and then she receives a picture of a 4-year-old boy with her son's name on the back. And she has to then come to terms with the fact that she might not be the person she thinks she is, or the person that she had been convinced she was after all.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
she should have believed in herself a bit more.
Yeah. That, and I love what you explained to us about the pressures of motherhood and the pressures to be a good mother, the perfect mother, and whilst there are certain standards, maybe if I can call them that, the worst person to want to adhere to those is probably ourselves.
We hold ourselves to those
Yeah.
standards.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't believe for a second that anyone else thought I was a bad mum because of those little things that happened.
Mhm.
It was I was fighting myself, and that's essentially what Susan has to do. She has to believe when she gets this picture and she finds out her son might actually be alive. She has to re-believe in herself, so that she can find out A, what's happened to her son, and B, why anyone would do that to her and convince her that he was dead. So
So
you've got a
from that,
twisty mystery, but then you've also got the sort of the womanhood, the
yeah,
birth, that sort of sense of identity, and really coming back into yourself.
yeah, yeah, and I think you have a way of writing, because if we come back to the summer girl,
Yeah.
right, yeah, it's almost like you've got strands going along, you've got a story being told, but you're also asking questions about other things. Whatever the story's about, there's layers around it, where I think you're getting us to think about other stuff as well.
I'd like to think so.
Mm-hmm.
Psychology is my thing. I have a degree in psychology. I spent a lot of my time studying human behavior. And so I like to ask questions about why people act the way they do. And people are complex. There's a whole and complex, and yet quite easy to predict a lot of the time. I feel like it can be quite easy to predict certain behaviors based on previous behaviors, and
Yeah.
so it's all winding that up into characters who then have rich stories to tell, and things, mysteries to solve, and murders to, but it's all about why they act the way they do.
And I think as well, I should say, I think it is clear from the way that you write, that interest that you have, that knowledge that you have around psychology, because the insight that we get, you know, what's going on in the heads of various characters. Yeah, that aspect of you shows
Thank
through.
you. That's
Yeah.
that is, I mean, that's the ultimate compliment, because that is ultimately what I try to do,
Mhm.
is get into the heads of the characters and show why their actions, even if we don't agree with them, and even if we wouldn't have taken the same action, it's why that character
Yeah.
took that action.
Yeah, that
Because I think
understanding.
psychological thrillers are full of characters that we don't understand why they didn't do this or didn't do that. And I think that sometimes, if you all it takes is to explain why that particular, you don't have to make that reader believe that they would do the same, you have to make that reader believe in your character and why they've done
Why
those.
they did it. Yeah. Which you do. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Hard
But
to say too much without giving away twists as well, isn't it?
exactly. Yeah, we can't. We can't.
No.
But what I would like to ask is that sense of, because you take us to Martha's Vineyard for this, and it's, I mean, it's one of those magical places, and you paint the magic even from that first page. But I love how you contrast it with the other side of that. And you have a lovely technique of, you're building this beautifully. It sounds great, and then it's just a one-liner that just sweeps us away from what we were, but where you were taking us. I don't want to call it a slap in the face, because that sounds bad, but it's a real, like, no, because
Reality check.
yeah,
Those
yeah,
places can be absolutely stunningly beautiful, and you put humans in them, you put people, and suddenly you've got both sides of human
it becomes
behavior. You've got
monstrous.
the good and the
Yeah.
bad. And obviously
Why?
in my books, you're going to have a bit more bad, because otherwise they would
Yeah,
be romance and
yeah.
comedies. And
Yeah, no, we need the badness. We need the badness, because again, I think is that, whilst we're reading the badness on the page, you were talking about, we can. I think we often do. I know I do as a reader. Think, oh, what would I do in that situation? But I think it's lovely to see. Well, I can be bad, but they're even worse than I am, so I don't feel so bad.
yes, they're deplorable. Also, you
What?
say about the setting. I was on a holiday once in I don't even remember it was, but it was beautiful, and I was on the beach, and it must have been before I had kids, because I was reading. So and I was paying attention to my book. So and it was a Stephen King with Peter Straub, I believe.
Uh-huh.
It was one of the books they'd written together, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember, or it might just have been a Peter Straub on his own. I think it was Shadowland, actually. So I
Okay.
can't remember whether he wrote that on his own. But I was reading this book, and I was so immersed in the horrific darkness of it. And all of a sudden, I just sort of looked up, and I'm in paradise. And I was like, wow, the contrast of me coming out of this dark, horrific world and looking up and being in paradise was just so stark that I thought that stayed with me long enough to think that at the time I didn't think I want to write about this, because I'd never thought I would be a writer. But later on in life, I think that's what I use in my books, this contrast of being in paradise and then reading about or experiencing awful things.
So choosing Martha's Vineyard, why would you choose that? I mean, there are all beautiful places throughout the world. Why the US, and why that spot?
So it's slightly based on a crime that happened in Greenwich in the US, the murder of Martha Moxley. I don't know if you're
Yeah,
into true crime. You probably
yeah.
know about that one if you are. And that was an affluent area, and it was a couple of guys that were in the frame, young teenage boys who were related to the Kennedys, and so really affluent people caught up in this terrible, terrible murder. And so part of the story comes from that. And so I wanted somewhere that sort of gave that sense of real opulence, that really affluent vibe, but was also somewhere that was home to outsiders. So Greenwich, no one outsider really.
Yeah.
You know,
But
you're
that
in,
sense of
that's it.
visiting,
Yeah.
yeah.
And with Martha's Vineyard, I totally loved what I loved about putting that in the story, because it's a beautiful place. I would love to visit there. I've never been, but I would absolutely love it. But what I loved about it was having this sense of, you had three sets of people. You had the locals who lived there all year round, and then you had the tourists who just came for like a week or two. But then you had the summer kids whose parents had summer homes on the vineyard, and so they would be there the entire summer every year. So they were sort of half growing up there. And so these three sets of people and how they intersect and how their lives entwine, that was what I really was interested in that.
and that exploration as well, you know, of privilege, like you say, and how, you know, it can, and it certainly does in the book, you know, covers a multitude of sins.
Yeah. But also
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I've just butting in because I remembered as well that while I was researching Martha's Vineyard, I'd made the decision to set the book there. And so I did a lot of research, read a lot of books that were set there, and watched a lot of films, Jaws being the main one. I love Jaws anyway. But Amity Island is actually set on Martha's Vineyard, filmed there. And then another one called Jump the Broom, and that was set there. And so I watched a lot of this, and what I actually found was one of my all-time favorite books, Judy
Wow.
Blue's Summer Sisters,
Yeah.
which I just found out is being reissued by Penguin. It was Sphere originally, but it's being reissued, I believe, by Penguin, set on Martha's Vineyard. I haven't read this. The reason it's on my shelves is because I went to find it. As soon as I saw it on Google as being one of the books set on the vineyard, I was like, I own that book. That was one of my favorite books as a teenager. I think I was 14 when I read that book, and just absolutely wanted to go to this place, and I just loved everything about it. And then 25 years later, end up accidentally setting my book there.
Yeah, the resonance of what affects us, and I really appreciate you sharing, you know, stories that, you know, had an impact on you in previous years, and yet it's almost like that impact then finds a way of coming out.
And when you realize it, it's like this light bulb moment that, oh my goodness, maybe that has been in there all along. It makes you worried actually about what else is in there. Goodness knows. And how much of that affects like what we do now and the choices we make now. Because if I hadn't seen that on a list of books to set in Martha's Vineyard, I might never have remembered that and known that that had played a part.
Yeah. Now, your characters, because I'm aware of time and we want to get as much about this book as we can. No, it's fine. It's just like, how can we get as much out without, well, not spoiling it and bringing people in. So tell me about Claire and Holly, because we have these two sisters. Yeah. And I think that's not giving anything away that isn't on the blurb. So who are they and what happens to them?
So Claire and Holly, like you say, are sisters, and there's a few years between them. Claire's older, and they suffer the awful tragedy off page of losing their mum. So we start months and months. Our story starts months and months after they lost their mother to cancer, which I find it very difficult to write about because I have health anxiety and I have young children, and the thought of them losing their mother, you know, is awful for me. So their mother being me, obviously. So all of that meant that I couldn't go as deeply into that part of the story as I would have maybe done if it wasn't so anxious for me. But so that all happens off screen. But then what we do find out, we begin finding out that Holly has gone away to grieve somewhere else. So she's gone to Martha's Vineyard to her mother's cancer means that she wants to seize the day. Her mother was young, you know, quite young, and it means that she's decided to grieve by actually seizing the day and not wasting a minute of her life. And so if she wants to do something, she's going to do it here and now, quite impulsive. Claire's chosen we're family, we should stick together. You should be here for us to grieve together. And so it's actually Claire, the older sister, the more dependable one, that we find falling apart at the beginning of the story. She worked at a bar, and I wouldn't use the word alcoholic, but she's spending too much time depending on staying at the bar late, and that means she's drinking more than she would have done. And so when we meet her, she's at the bar that she works at, and she's drinking too much, and she's ready to make a bad choice with an old flame. And her cousin shows up and says that she hasn't heard from Claire's sister in a few days, and that's very unlike Holly not to be in contact. And then Jess says that she got a text message from Holly that morning. And Claire says, well, why are you so concerned then? You know, you've just said you haven't heard from her. Why are you so concerned?
Got a message, yeah.
And then she finds out that the text message says, tell Mum I'm fine. And so immediately Claire knows that Holly didn't send that text message. So that's when Claire sobers up somewhat and thinks, well, maybe I need to find out what's going on with my sister. And so she goes to Martha's Vineyard, because there wouldn't be a book if she didn't. So she ups and goes to Martha's Vineyard, and she makes that choice to go and find her sister. And when she gets there, she's told her sister isn't actually missing. She's just a traveller. And that's what travellers travel, you know, and the police aren't concerned and the locals aren't concerned, because that's what travellers do. They fly in, they move on. And Claire wants to know, if that's the case, then why all her sister's stuff is still in the rental that she's got, and why no one wants to entertain the idea that anything might have happened to her.
I think, you know, again, as I said, you raise points for us to consider, that being one of them, that it's easy to dismiss, you know, what's happened to someone. Well, nothing's happened to them. They've just, you know, they've moved on, you know, and
what I didn't want was, because it started out where in my head that, you know, the locals had a dark secret and they were, you know, stereotypically small place, bad people. But actually, as I was writing it, it came out to me, and I don't want that to sound all literary, you know, it came out to me, but it sort of dawned on me that these people didn't have to be bad people in order to convince themselves that there was nothing wrong. They just had to really want nothing to be wrong, which on a small island that depends on tourism, and as we find out, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say, we find out that another girl had gone missing 5 years earlier. And following that, they didn't want that dragged up again, and they didn't want any more history coming, and they don't want tourism spoiled, and they don't want people to feel unsafe on their island. And you don't have to be a bad person to cover up the truth, because all you have to do is want what you're saying to be true. And the police and the locals, they really wanted Holly not to be missing. They wanted her to have moved on of her own accord, because that's the easiest situation all round, and that's the best situation all round. And there's one person actually that does believe that the worst might have happened, and maybe kind of wants to believe that the worst has happened, because then they're not on their own anymore, and that's Gina, and that's the sister of the girl who went missing 5 years ago.
And I think, again, these points of view that you offer us through the characters, and you know, often, you know, in discussing books and discussing in that sense of, well, there's all these characters and who is it? But I think, again, I think the way that you write, it's very clear who's who. You know, it's not a question of, oh, I wonder who this, could this be? No, and it made me wonder, not how you do it, but the fact of, for you, is it very clear at the outset, the characters and who they are, or do they, as you move along, do they reveal themselves so that you can bring them forward?
No, I generally know who my characters are and what they're, because I start with the end in mind. I know the ending of all my books before I write them. So, and a lot of the times it's because the idea, the initial thing that's hooked me into the book, is a lot of the time the twist or the denouement, the, you know, the ending, the reveal. And so I know where I'm going, and I just need to know how I get there. And because I know where I'm going and I know what the twist is, generally I tend to know what people's motivations are quite early, because I know what they did or didn't do. In this book, I took the path of showing people for who they are quite early on. I don't think there's many people in this book that you don't have a measure of at some point. I think there's a couple maybe that will surprise you, but I don't think there's a lot. It's not like Clue, you know, where you've got 7 people and you don't, and they've all got equal motives. I think generally you tend to know in this book who people are. In my previous books, that's not necessarily the case. In my previous books, you might have a cast of X amount of people, and you don't know which ones are the shifty ones and which ones are the good ones. Whereas in this one, I think people are quite clear about who they are. Straight up. Not necessarily what they've done, but who they are.
But and there's another aspect I wanted to talk to you about, if that's okay. The fact that it's sisters, and it's, I've seen other books where it's a brother and sister, or friends even, and nobody writes anything without deliberate thought of why or bringing it together. The choice of sisters for you, what did that allow you to do that maybe another combination wouldn't have?
I think that it was always going to be sisters, and for some reason, I don't know why, because I suppose it would have worked almost as well with a mother and daughter,
Mm-hmm.
um, in that sense of mother fleeing to find daughter. But
Yeah.
me, it had to be two people who were ridiculously close, because there's not I have best friends, but I'm not sure I would fly to Martha's Vineyard before I knew 100% that someone was missing. If I'm being told by police and locals that everything's fine, I'm not sure on the basis of one text message I would up and fly to Martha's Vineyard. Maybe I would, but until you're in that situation, maybe you
Yeah.
don't know. But it had to be two people who were close enough for that to be not even think twice about it. Once she was certain that there was something wrong, she was going. Um, and to me, that bond between siblings, I feel like it's family. It's something that you can't necessarily break that easily. And in my previous book, so in The Girl Who Left, there's a sister and a brother, and they're ridiculously close. And I think it's because you've shared things
Yeah.
that other people haven't shared.
Yeah.
And with Claire and Holly, so it started when I started writing the book. Claire was a quite a goody, and she was quite a good girl, and she was the older sibling, and she was level-headed, and I thought that that's what it needed to make the book work, for her to go and find out.
Mm-hmm.
She was the investigative type, and I thought I needed her to be head on her shoulders, have everything together. And something wasn't working about it, and I realized that at some point she was going to have to grieve for her mum as well, and at some point this relationship between the two of them had to be real, not necessarily just, oh, we're sisters, therefore we're best friends.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
sisters, therefore we share all of the good, but we also share the bad.
Yeah.
And so they had such this rich shared history, especially of just losing the only other person in their life that had that history, because their dad's not around. So they share this bond, and then to have that sort of shaky from the off, and then have her have to go and find her sister. It just made it all that more powerful. And
Mm.
also, people who haven't got all their stuff together all the time are actually more fun to write. So Claire became a lot more fun to write once she was no longer a goody two shoes. Once I
I'm,
could have her making some sloppy choice, like not sloppy choices in what she does once she finds out Holly's missing. I feel like her choices are pretty spot on.
yeah.
Choices before that,
Yeah.
her recklessness with herself, with her health, with her welfare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Again, I think that idea of being able to identify with someone, those perfect characters. So, yeah.
I've never enjoyed writing them. I don't. In fact, I can't remember the last time I wrote a good girl main character. My
Yeah.
main character in the hiking trip, in the first scene, she keys someone's car, and immediately when I wrote that, I thought, we're going to have fun in this book. Like
She's
I'm
yeah.
gonna like you.
She's my kind of girl.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 That's
Yeah.
what we all want to do when someone upsets us.
Yeah.
Someone that steals her mother and baby parking spot who hasn't got a baby.
Baby. Yeah. Yeah.
The amount of times that's happened to me, and I've wanted to just get my keys out and scrape them all
Yeah.
down the
Yes.
car.
Yes. Show me
But just
where.
because,
Show me where the child is. And
yeah.
yeah.
Well, he even says to her, "I've got a child. They're at home," and I'm like, "Ooh, Kia's car." So, and so I like my characters to kind of act how we would wish we could act.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, they're not always good people.
I wonder, because I've got a couple more questions, if I may,
Yeah.
but they're about you, so that we get to know you a little bit more. I'm really, really grateful for all the insight that you've shared into the book. But as I was reading, I always like to look at acknowledgements, things like that. And you mentioned hunting Pokemon with and I was going to ask, Have you been very successful? Are you a good Pokemon hunter?
So I was, when my son, it came out when he was, I want to say 4 or 5, maybe around that time.
Mhm.
And so we lived in town, and the same place as where he was born. And we lived on a main road, and across the road was a gym and a Pokestop. And so he loved hunting Pokemon with me. And it was our thing that we did together.
Beautiful.
And
Yeah,
obviously, as kids grow out of things, I don't. I'm a collector. I love collecting stuff. And Pokemon was something I loved collecting. I loved finding the rare ones and the ones I hadn't got yet. Um, I know I'm a real geek like that.
loved it. I
So
loved reading that.
he grew out of it and I didn't, so I carried on. And if I go to somewhere like London, somewhere different, I'll still always try for a Pokemon.
Mm.
But I do find that we live in the country now, and we don't
It's
get
not the
much.
same. It's not
No,
the
it's
same.
not the same.
No.
We don't get many Pokemon around here.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I remember, I will sort of, if I go somewhere. We recently went to Mexico and I managed to get a couple of good ones that I hadn't had
Oh,
before there.
yeah.
But
Ah,
yeah, if I remember, I definitely will still do it.
let us know when your next one is. And then the other thing I wanted to ask, because when I saw it, it brought back so many happy memories. Um, one of the most beautiful films I think ever made. Fried
I
green
knew you were going to say
tomatoes,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say about that.
Um, what does it mean to you? I mean, just that idea that you would include it, you know, in that blurb, out of probably so many films that you have watched. What does this film mean to you?
I do believe that it was one of the first films, or the first films I remember seeing, that is incredibly touching. And unfortunately, well, I probably can watch it now. My health anxiety is better now than it has been in
Okay,
recent.
yeah, yeah.
Started up in 2020, and it was so bad that there's no way I would have been able to watch it because the lady in it is dying of cancer. And so I just wouldn't have been able to. I could probably watch it again now and not
Mhm.
have an attack. But at the time, it's got a killer twist. Do you
Oh
remember?
yes, oh yes.
That is one of the best twists of my life. And I remember, like, when I first watched it, I wasn't into psychological thrillers, but I would I would put forward an argument that Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe is one of the best psychological thrillers I've ever seen.
Yeah,
And you think it's a family drama, and you think that it's this really touching, sweet story. It's dark.
it's
And so
yeah,
I remember getting to that twist and being genuinely floored. Like, wow, that is brilliant.
and and
Um,
and if my
go on.
memory serves me rightly, what happens in the film, they borrowed it in Gentleman Jack as well.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, for one of the more problematic characters. So yeah.
So I was just absolutely floored by it. But also I loved the dual narrative, which I use in a lot of my
Yeah,
books
yeah,
now. They're going back in time. So it's for anyone who hasn't seen it or read the book, which I haven't read the book. But for anyone who hasn't, it's about a woman who's in a nursing home, and she's telling a story of when she was younger to a woman that's having turmoil in her own life. And so she takes comfort in her own life in this woman's stories,
yeah.
and she gets to know these characters through this woman. And then you're seeing their story as well. And it's like, these people are so real. The characters were so rich, and they have stayed with me. Idgie has like Idgie has stayed with me through my entire life, like this barefoot girl going climbing trees and getting honey out of the trees. And I just think, yeah, she was just a fantastic character. And the killer twist in the
Yes,
end.
yeah, yeah.
And I feel like, again, it's like one of these Summer Sisters things where you think how much that influenced or maybe predicted the sort of thing that I would do for a living. Did it influence it, or did it predict it? Did I love the
Mm.
twist because I was born to be a writer, or did I become a writer because I loved the twist? You never know.
Personally, I would say it's a beautiful fusion of
Yeah.
of both aspects. Jenny, Jenny Blackhurst. Oh, thank you for coming in to the consultation room. Thank you for sharing with us so much, not only about your writing, but all that's behind it, all that's influenced you, inspired you, the choices that you've made as you've gone along. Um, and, The Summer Girl out now, and the title of the one that's out soon. Have you got it
3 Card
there?
Murder.
Yeah, it's a 3 card murder. I knew it was something to do with gambling. Or it made me think gambling. It's probably
So this
nothing.
one, just to add, this one isn't a psychological thriller. It's my first non-psych thriller, and it's 3 locked room mysteries in one book. So there's a police officer, a con woman, and their sisters again. Their sisters estranged, and they have to work together for the first time in 15 years to solve a locked room murder. So Impossible Crimes, Jonathan Creek meets Hustle. That's that one.
Beautiful. Jenny, please keep, no pressure, but please keep writing these kinds of
I have
stories.
to. It's all I can do now. I'm unemployable in any other way.
But maybe again, these things that happen, that it's given you that space to develop what is it's such a beautiful skill. And thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much for having me. Thank you.
pleasure. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.